The wind howled across the plains like a banshee, dragging fire through the brittle grass in a roaring, relentless wave. Orange tongues licked the sky, swallowing up the barn, the chicken coop, and the thin, splintered house with a ferocity that dared the heavens to intervene. But the heavens remained silent. Noya ran barefoot through the smoke, her dark braid undone, her lungs burning with every breath. Her baby cried against her chest, wrapped in the folds of her deerskin shawl, his small fists beating weakly against. Her ribs, she did not feel them. The sound of crackling wood and screaming horses drowned everything else. "Tika, run!" she shouted through the smoke. Her eldest, just 12, emerged from the side of the collapsing barn with his little sister's hand clenched in his own. His face was blackened with soot, eyes wide and streaming. Beside him, his younger brother stumbled, coughing so hard he nearly dropped. The fire danced closer. "Keep moving!" She screamed again, her voice already raw, tearing into the night like a wild thing. The children didn't need telling. The moment they reached her, she turned and ran. Behind her, the last wall of the house gave in with a shriek of snapping timber. A red wave of embers chased them across the dirt, reaching for hair, for cloth, for skin. The baby screamed louder, his cries choked and desperate. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the dried riverbed, 200 yards away. Noya fell to her knees, clutching her baby to her chest. The children collapsed around her, coughing, weeping, blinking ash from their eyes. Their home, the only piece of her husband left, was gone. It was past midnight when Caleb Ryder arrived. He was on the ridge when he saw the smoke curling into the sky, a dark pillar stabbing at the moonlit clouds. He kicked his horse hard and rode through the sagebrush like a man possessed, the wagon behind him bouncing with every rut and root. By the time he reached the smoldering wreck, the wind had died down, but the stench of charred wood and singed flesh clung to the earth like a ghost. He spotted them crouched by the riverbed, 4 children huddled around a woman cradling a baby. At first, he thought she was dead. She didn't move when he dropped from his saddle, boots thudding hard into the dust. "Ma'am," he said gently. Kneeling before her, she blinked at him, slow and blank, as if he were a figure carved from smoke. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks streaked with soot, but her grip on the baby never loosened. "My name's Caleb Ryder. I run the ranch out west, couple miles beyond the mesa. You and your young uns all right?" No answer. The children looked up at him like feral creatures, eyes wide, hollow. Caleb's hand twitched toward his canteen. He unscrewed it and held it out to the boy. Tika took it slowly, hesitantly, and handed it to his mother. She took a sip and coughed, nearly choking. But the color started to return to her face. "It was the wind," she finally said, her voice hoarse. "Took a spark from the stove. Caught the roof. I tried to stop it." Caleb glanced toward the wreckage. He didn't believe her, not entirely. That fire hadn't spread naturally. It had chased them. Still, now wasn't the time. "I'll take you all back to the ranch. Ain't safe out here." He stood, offering her his hand. She didn't take it. "I don't know you," she said quietly. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Mom. Just saying you got little ones to think about, and they'll die out here by morning if you don't move." A long silence passed. Then, slowly, she got to her feet. The ride back was quiet, save for the baby's occasional mewling. Caleb let Noya and the children ride in the wagon, wrapped in spare blankets he'd brought. He rode alongside, eyes constantly sweeping the horizon. Something in the air made his skin crawl. When they reached the ranch, dawn was already touching the eastern sky with gray fingers. The main house stood solid and warm, framed by fences and open pasture. A few sleepy cattle stirred, blinking in confusion at the early arrival. Noya said nothing as Caleb helped the children down. She looked at the house as if expecting it to vanish. The front door creaked open, and a dog padded out, wagging once. Before retreating back inside, he led them to the guest quarters, a modest cabin on the side of the main house, rarely used since his wife died 2 winters ago. There's food on the stove, wash basin in the corner. Sheets are clean, Caleb sighed. Yell if you need anything. She turned to him, eyes narrowing. Why are you helping us? He hesitated. My wife used to say, a man's worth is what he does when there's nothing in it for him. She didn't reply Dot as he turned. To leave, a tiny voice called out from the doorway. Papa? Caleb stopped cold Dot. It was the baby. No, not the baby. The little girl, perhaps 5 years old, barefoot and soot-smeared, peeking around her older brother's leg. Her hair stuck up like prairie grass, and she was rubbing sleep from her eyes. She reached her arms toward Caleb. Papa, she repeated. Noya's face darkened. She stepped forward quickly, scooping the girl into her arms, holding her close. She doesn't understand, she said, almost angrily. Her real father died last spring. We buried him in the foothills. Caleb nodded once, his voice low. I'm sorry. He left before she could say anything more. That night, Noya sat beside the small hearth in the guest cabin, staring into the flames. The children were asleep, sprawled out on borrowed bedding. She held the baby, his breathing soft and even now. The firelight flickered across her face, casting deep shadows beneath her eyes. She hadn't cried. Not yet, not even when the roof fell in. Not even when she watched the place they built with their own hands turn to ash dot, but now, alone with the fire's hiss and the weight of 4 lives pressing against her chest, her mouth began to tremble. One tear escaped before she caught herself. She blinked hard and looked away. The man, Caleb, had risked his life for strangers. That unsettled her more than the fire. People didn't do that. Not for widows. Not for Apache women. Her husband had been a war scout, feared, proud, but after the war, after the treaties were signed, and the white men flooded the land with rail lines and liquor, they had become ghosts in their own country. Her husband had died protecting their last few, acres from cattlemen. She'd been surviving ever since, not living, just surviving. She wasn't sure what Caleb was. But she knew kindness always had a cost. The world had taught her that much. A noise at the door startled her. She turned, knife already in hand. The latch moved slightly, but it was just a knock dot. She opened it a crack. Caleb stood there, holding a small wooden box. This belonged to my wife, he said simply. Her old sewing kit. Thought you might find use for it. Noya hesitated, then took it. Their eyes met for a breath too long. Good night, he said, and turned away. Noya watched him go. Behind her, the fire snapped softly dot ashes in the wind. Maybe that was all they were now. But for the first time in months, she wasn't sure that was the end of her story. The sun hung low over the hills, bleeding gold across the sky like a wound left to fester. Noya stood at the edge of the ranch's corral, watching Caleb lead a skittish filly through her paces. The children had begun to laugh again, not often, not freely, but enough to crack the silence. Enough to remind her they were still alive, but the laughter never touched her. Not truly, because every moment of stillness brought with it a memory too dark to escape. Rhett Malden. Even now, the name tasted like iron in her mouth. 6 months ago, the world had gone quiet after her husband's death, ambushed while hunting left, for dead by men who never bothered to check if his eyes closed for good. The tribal council, decimated and scattered by the years of war and treaties, offered no protection. Widows had no power, especially not one with 4 children and a half burned. Homestead. That was when Rhett came. He arrived with gifts and honeyed words, wrapped in a white man's charm and a killer's eyes. Claimed he had land, protection, a future. Claimed he respected her husband, said he'd admired him as a warrior. But admiration was not what lived behind Rhett's crooked smile. Noya had refused at first, proudly, but she hadn't counted on her own people being afraid of what would come if she said no. By the time the council urged her to reconsider, her children were hungry, and the cold nights had grown longer. Brett married her under a sky full of stars, dragging her by the arm to a preacher who smelled of whiskey and fear. The first bruise came 3 days later. Noya's hand gripped the fence post, knuckles white. She could still feel the sting of his belt, the way he'd leer at her in front of the children. His threats, the way he'd make her beg. She remembered hiding her oldest son in a hollowed-out pit while Rhett stomped through the cabin, shouting that the boy needed to learn obedience. She remembered staring at the moon through bloodied lashes, promising herself she would never let him touch the baby. When she ran, she didn't take the road. She took the land, moved like the wind, slept beneath the stars, never once lighting. A fire dot he would follow. She knew that. He had to. Rhett was a man who couldn't stand to be denied. And now, she had led him here. You know that look on your face'd scare most men, Caleb said, stepping beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. He leaned against the same post, wiping sweat from his brow with a folded bandana. I wasn't aiming to scare, she said, still staring at the sky. I didn't say I minded. Caleb gave a dry chuckle. That horse doesn't like me, by the way. He senses something. Her voice was low. Maybe that you're grieving, same as me. Caleb's eyes narrowed. You think I'm grieving? You bury pain in work, in silence, same as I do. He said nothing, his jaw tightening. Then, you were married before. He die in battle? Noya nodded. A good man, fierce, too proud for this world. Caleb studied her, then asked the question he'd held back since she arrived. And the girl? The one you ran from? Noya stiffened. That was no husband. That was a mistake I was forced to survive. They stood in silence until one of the ranch hands rode up fast, hooves kicking dust like smoke. Ryder, the man called. You best come see this. Caleb turned without a word. Noya followed. Out by the fence line, someone had hammered a rusted horseshoe into one of the posts. Beneath it, a scrap of cowhide hung from a nail, the words scorched into it with black coal. I always find what's mine. Blood soaked the bottom edge of the leather, and a lock of black hair, unmistakably Noya's, dangled from the tack. Noya stared at it without blinking. Her body trembled, but her face was stone. Caleb ripped the sign down. Who is he? Noya looked up, voice calm, almost eerily so. Rhett Malden. He's killed men for less than what I did. Caleb's fingers clenched around the message. You think he's close? If this is here, he's watching already. Caleb turned to the ranch hand. Double patrols. Lock every gate. Load the rifles and get the dogs in the field. Noya placed a hand on his arm. You should have let me leave. I already buried one family, Caleb said. Not again. That night, Grace Collier rode in like a summer storm, sun-kissed, leather-clad, her revolver resting comfortably on her hip. She dismounted with a confident swing, brushed the dust from her skirt, and walked into the main house without waiting for an invite. Still don't lock your doors, Ryder? She called. Caleb smiled thinly. Still breaking them if I did? They shared a brief hug. Noya watched from the shadows of the porch. Grace's eyes swept the ranch before landing on Noya. So, she's the one? Her name's Noya, Caleb said evenly. She and her kids need protection. Grace's brows lifted. I know who she is. And I know who's after her. She turned toward Noya, extending a hand. Name's Grace. Used to run dispatch for the U.S. Scouts. These days I track monsters for sport. Noya shook it, eyes never leaving the pistol on Grace's hip. He's killed again, Grace said without ceremony. 2 homesteads up north, burned both to the ground. One of the victims was a widow. Noya's stomach twisted. He wants to make an example of you, Grace continued. But I think he's underestimating you. Noya said nothing, but her spine straightened. The following morning, Noya stood outside the tool shed with Caleb, rolling bandages in the rising sun. Her children helped shovel feed for the horses, while Grace cleaned her gun with quiet precision. You ever fight? Caleb asked, handing her a flask of whiskey for sterilizing wounds. I used to watch my husband train the boys. He said my blade was sharper than my tongue. He wasn't wrong. Caleb chuckled. Good, because I'll need everyone sharp when that devil comes knocking. She nodded, but her eyes held a flicker of doubt. Caleb leaned in slightly. You don't have to prove anything to me. But she did. She had to prove it to herself. That evening, the dogs howled. A shot rang out by the west field. Caleb and Grace bolted from the house, rifles in hand. Noya ran with them. They found a ranch hand bleeding from the thigh, barely conscious. A crude blade had been thrown, not to kill, but to send a message. While Caleb dragged the wounded man inside, Noya tore a strip from her dress, used the whiskey to cleanse the wound, and stitched the leg with surgeon-like calm. Her hands were sure. Swift. Grace watched silently, nodding in approval. I've seen army medics less steady than you. Noya tied the knot and leaned back. Her breath trembled once, then steadied. You can do more than survive. Grace sighed. You can win. That night, Caleb locked the door to the guest cabin himself. You fight like a warrior, he said. Your husband must have been proud. Noya studied him carefully. And your wife? Would she be proud of you now? Caleb stared at the sky for a long moment. She always told me I carried too much weight on my back. That one day, I'd either break or find someone strong enough to share the burden. Noya tilted her head. And have you? Caleb didn't answer, but he lingered at the doorway longer than necessary. Inside, little Tiva clutched the wooden sewing box against her chest and whispered, Papa? To no one in particular. Noya sat beside her, kissed her forehead, and whispered, Not yet, little one. But something in her heart stirred. Maybe, just maybe, one day. The prairie was quiet. Too quiet. The wind had died completely. No birds, no insects, just the creak of saddle leather and the distant sigh of tall grass. Noya stood on the porch of Caleb's ranch house, eyes scanning the horizon, her fingers curled around the handle of the old hunting knife she'd kept hidden since she fled Rhett Malden. Its grip was worn smooth from use, her husband's blade, but it still cut deep. She could feel it in her blood. He was coming. Caleb stood in the barn, checking the stock of shells for the 4th time that morning. Grace leaned in the stall, arms crossed, revolver holstered but ready. He's not going to hit the front, Grace said. Too obvious. He's too proud to come sneaking. Caleb muttered. No, he's too cruel not to, Grace corrected. He's not here to kill her. He wants to humiliate her. Make her feel small. She's not small. I didn't say she was. Grace tilted her head, but he's banking on her feeling like she is. Caleb's jaw clenched. I won't let that happen. Grace raised a brow. Then be ready to kill him. That night, Noya tucked her children in as quietly as she had the night her husband died. The firelight flickered across their sleeping faces. Tika's arms curled protectively around little Tiva, while Kunu held the carved wooden horse Caleb had given him. She sat beside the hearth, blade across her lap, staring into the flames. Her heart pounded like a war drum, not with fear, but with the bitter rhythm of preparation. She'd run once. Not again. When the knock came, it wasn't loud. Just 3 slow taps on the cabin door. She didn't move. Outside, a familiar voice slithered through the wood. "I see you, woman." Her breath caught. "You took what belonged to me. Thought you could vanish into dirt and dust, didn't you?" Noya stood. "You always were proud. That's what made you worth chasing." She stepped to the door, slid the bolt free. "Noya, don't." Caleb's voice called out faintly from the yard. Too late. She opened it. There he stood. Rhett Malden. Black hat. Brown duster. A pistol slung low on his hip, his fingers tapping it like a lullaby. His smile was wide and wrong, like a snake learning to show teeth. Behind him, 2 men lingered in the dark, one with a rifle, the other with a scar down his jaw and a match in his teeth. "Well now," Rhett whispered, "ain't you still a vision?" "I'm not yours," Noya said, voice cold. Rhett tilted his head, amused. "You married me. That means something. I was coerced. I don't recall you protesting too hard when I fed your brats. Gave them a roof. You gave me a cage." He chuckled and stepped forward. Caleb's rifle cracked through the night. A bullet struck the dirt 2 inches from Rhett's boot. "Step back," Caleb growled from the shadows. "You ain't on your own land." Rhett turned toward the sound, still smiling. "Well, if it ain't the rancher with the Messiah complex." He stepped just far enough back to mock obedience. "Tell me, Ryder, she got in your bed yet, or are you still sleeping with ghosts?" Caleb didn't answer. Noya spoke first. "You came to threaten me. Threaten my children. I came to take what's mine. You won't get it." Grace appeared behind Rhett, rifle trained on the man with the scar. "Evening, gentlemen." The man stiffened. Rhett didn't move. "You want this fight?" Caleb asked flatly. "Because if you do, we'll bury you before dawn." Rhett's eyes never left Noya. "This ain't over," he said, stepping back slowly. "You'll come home eventually. They always do." The next morning, blood was found on the east fence. One of Caleb's wrench hands had been gutted, his body left beneath the sycamore. Grace paced the floor inside the main house, her fingers twitching near her sidearm. "He's testing us," she muttered, "seeing how long it'll take to break our resolve." Noya stood at the window. "He's wrong. He thinks fear is enough." "It used to be, but not now?" Noya turned. "Not now." They buried the ranch hand just after sundown. Tika helped Caleb dig the grave. It was the first time the boy had lifted a shovel for something other than survival. "He was brave," Tika said softly. "He tried to warn us." Caleb rested a hand on his shoulder. "So are you." The boy looked up. "You gonna marry my mama?" Caleb froze. "What makes you ask that?" "You look at her like my father used to. Before the war." Caleb smiled faintly. "Let's get this man buried first." That night, Grace drew a map in the dirt with a stick. "He'll attack from the south ridge. It's blind, easy to sneak through." "Then we wait there," Caleb said. "I'll go with you," Noya added. Caleb glanced at her. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They waited in silence, hidden among the rocks and sagebrush, rifles across. Their knees, dust in their lungs. Moonlight cast long shadows. Coyotes howled in the distance. Then movement. A flicker of silhouette. Grace whispered, "3 men. 1 behind, 2 flanking." Caleb cocked his rifle. Noya drew her husband's knife. The ambush was sudden and savage. Rhett's men charged through the ridge. Brush. 1 fell instantly to Caleb's shot. The second lunged for Noya, swinging a club. She ducked low, rolled through the dust, and slashed upward, catching the man across the thigh. He screamed and stumbled back, but she was on him in an instant, knife to the throat. Then Rhett came. He tackled her from behind, slamming her hard into the rocks. Her breath burst from her lungs. She rolled as he reached for his pistol. Her knife flashed, cut his cheek, but he caught her wrist and twisted. "You're mine," he hissed. "No," she snarled. "I was never yours." And then the shot. Rang out. Caleb. The bullet took Rhett in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He fell, dropping the gun. Noya stood over him, blood on her hands. He looked up, eyes wild. "You think he'll love you? You think this ends clean?" She lifted her husband's blade. "No," she whispered, "but it ends." She plunged it into the earth beside Rhett's head, burying it deep, not in his flesh, but in the land. "I don't need to kill you," she said. "You're already dead." Grace kicked Rhett's pistol away. Let the law take him. Noya looked down at the trembling man, coughing in the dust. Then she turned and walked away. They burned Rhett's weapons the next morning. His gang scattered. Grace took him to the marshal, shackled and half-conscious, bleeding from a shoulder wound he'd never recover from Dot as the wagon left the ranch. Noya stood with her children, wind in her hair, the dawn golden behind her. Caleb stepped beside her. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied softly. "We did." He nodded once. Little Tiva tugged Caleb's coat. "Are you our papa now?" He looked to Noya. She nodded. "Only if you want me to be," Caleb said. "Tiva, beamed. "I do." The storm was over, but the sky didn't know it yet. Clouds lingered heavy and low over the Wyoming range, dragging their shadows across the rolling hills. The wind had changed direction, cooler now, like the land was exhaling for the first time. In years, Noya stood at the edge of the field, bare feet in the soil, her hair unbound for the first time since she buried her husband. She had survived Rhett Malden. But survival, she was learning, was not the same as peace. Peace was heavier. Ranch had returned to routine, fencing repaired, livestock counted, the children back to their chores. But silence still stretched across the rooms like an untold story. The air smelled of dust and gun oil, and the soft rosewater soap Grace had left behind before riding out to Arizona with a marshal's badge and a bounty sheet longer than her. Rifle. Caleb sat on the porch each morning, mending tools or rubbing linseed into saddle leather, eyes always half on the horizon. He didn't speak of the night Rhett was taken. He didn't speak of the shot he fired, or the one he didn't. But Noya knew what he carried. She saw it in his shoulders, in the way his eyes dimmed at dusk, and she knew something else. He loved her Dot, and he was waiting for her to decide if she could carry that weight, not just the love, but the peace that came after war. "I used to dream of running," Noya said one morning, hands buried in the vegetable patch. Not from danger, from the quiet, from the ache. Caleb knelt beside her, churning soil. "And now?" "Now I wonder if staying still is the harder thing." He nodded. "You don't owe me peace, Noya, or yourself. Not yet." She glanced at him. "But I owe it to the children. They're healing. They're watching. They need more than food and safety." She paused. "They need a mother who isn't afraid to live." Caleb met her eyes. "Then let them see one." Tika had stopped speaking after Rhett. The boy had buried something inside him, too deep for words, a kind of stillness that frightened her more than any wound. But a week after Rhett was gone, she found him behind the barn, carving a hawk into a scrap of cedar. "I remember," he said without looking up, "how Papa used to whistle to the hawks." She knelt beside him. "He taught you well." Tika looked up. "Can I teach Kunu?" "Yes," she said. "Teach him everything." He nodded, eyes wet but steady. "And Caleb?" Her breath caught. "What about him?" she asked. Tika frowned. Uncertain. Is he allowed to stay? She placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. That choice belongs to all of us. He looked toward the house, where Caleb hammered fence planks with Kunu trailing behind. I think Papa would like him, Tika said quietly. And Noya, for the first time, felt something bloom inside her that wasn't fear. That night, she walked into the main house alone. The fire was low, casting gold across the wooden floor. Caleb sat in the rocker, whittling a piece of pine. He looked up but didn't speak. I want to tell you a story, she said. He set the wood aside. I'm listening. She sat across from him, folding her hands. There was once a girl in the mountains who married a man not for love, but because the snow was coming and her babies needed shelter. Caleb's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. She didn't know. That man would poison her from the inside out, that he would take her spirit piece by piece. But she escaped. She did. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was learning how to breathe again. She leaned forward. You gave me air. You didn't try to save me. You let me choose to live. He swallowed hard, eyes locked on hers. I wasn't sure if I deserved your love, she said, but now I think I do, and I want it. Caleb stood slowly, walked to her, and knelt, not to propose, not to possess, but to match her height, her gaze, her heart. You don't have to carry my name, he said, but I'd be proud if you did. She touched his face. Then take mine too, she whispered. We carry each other. They married at dawn, beneath the sycamore where the ranch hand had been buried, not to erase what had happened, but to plant something stronger in its place. Tiva tossed wildflowers in the dust. Kunu cried because his boots were too tight. Tika stood proud and silent, his eyes like stone. Grace sent a telegram from Tucson. Heard the news. Don't let the bastard haunt your peace. Tell the kids their crazy auntie's coming back for Christmas. Don't burn the stew. They laughed when they read it aloud. Even Tika smiled. Seasons passed. The ranch grew. Noya taught the children to trek deer and ride bareback like her father once taught her. Caleb showed them how to read the stars, how to treat saddle sores, and when to let a wounded animal go. Some nights, Noya dreamed of flames and screaming, of hoofbeats in the dark. But when she woke, her blade was never in her hand. Only Caleb's fingers, calloused and strong, laced gently in hers. One morning, Tiva came running into the kitchen with dirt on her nose and a flower crown in her hand. Mama, she said breathlessly, I found a baby rabbit. It was hiding by the fence. Noya crouched. Did you touch it? No, just watched. It was all shivery, like it didn't know if it was safe. Noya smiled. That's how rabbits survive. They wait until they're sure. Tiva tilted her head. Did we do that too? Noya paused. Yes, she whispered, but we're not hiding anymore. Tiva beamed. Can we keep it? Noya laughed. Let the rabbit choose, little one, just like we did. On the anniversary of their wedding, Noya and Caleb stood once more by the old sycamore. The children ran wild in the distance, their laughter ringing across the hills like bells. Do you still miss her? Noya asked gently, her hand in his. Every day, Caleb said, but the ache's different now. Like a scar. It reminds me, but it doesn't stop me. She nodded. Same with me. Caleb looked toward the sky. You ever think Rhett could have turned out different? He asked. No, she said, firm. But I think I could have, if not for you. He looked at her then, not as a widow, not as a mother, not as a survivor, but as the woman who chose to stay. And she smiled, not the guarded smile she'd worn when she first arrived, not the quiet one she wore in fear, but the full, open, unburdened kind like someone finally letting the weight fall. Some peace is fought for, some peace is earned, and some peace is chosen. Noya chose hers, with calloused hands, an old knife, and a new heart.